I'm David Brinkley, NBC News. Defense Secretary Laird said the Nixon administration was bargaining publicly in Paris and privately, trying to end the Vietnam War. And if this does not work, he said there's still another plan, but he wouldn't say what it was. This was in a hearing before a Senate committee, and it came up when Senator Fulbright said if the war wasn't ended soon, it would become Mr. Nixon's war, and that he would be hung with it as Mr. Johnson was. And he said something had to be done soon to end the war, or the country would go down the drain.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would just like to say that this administration is committed to end the war in Vietnam. We are presently engaged in very important peace talks in Paris. I want you to know that we are hopeful that we will be successful in the talks that have gone forward in Paris. But if we are not successful, and we pray for success, I can assure you that we will have an alternative as far as the war is concerned and the present conduct of that war. But I do not believe that it serves this nation or the cause of peace in Southeast Asia any real good to carry on our bargaining, our negotiations in public at this time. I can assure you that every effort is being made not only through formal diplomatic channels, formally in the Paris peace talks, but privately as well. And I do not believe that this is the place or that this is the time to carry out those kinds of negotiations and that kind of bargaining in public.
Mr. Secretary, I've heard this before and I accepted it for a while, but independent evidence is not consistent with this forever. After your meeting on Wednesday, Senator Stennis, the chairman of that committee, summed it up, I think, by a very ominous statement saying, well, it's quite evident from the Secretary's report that we will be in Vietnam a long, long time. Everything that you said and was reported in the press indicated that there is not any reasonable hope on your part or your generals that there is any prospect whatever of closing it. And the escalation of the fighting is also, in my view, quite inconsistent with it. The history of the escalation since this bombing halt, in my view, is inconsistent with the idea that there is any movement or even, in some sense, a desire to really seriously talk peace under present conditions. Each side thinking, I suppose, that it's going to get stronger and negotiate from strength. This has been the illusion for several years.
Well, Mr. Chairman,
this is a repetition. What I object to is this is such an old broken record we hear, going back to the days of McNamara.
Laird refused any details in public on what the Nixon administration was doing exactly. But the president in California this weekend is meeting with Ambassador Ellsworth Bunker and others who are flying in from Vietnam to talk with him.
The Huntley-Brinkley Report is produced by NBC News and brought to you in color by New Breck Basic, the first texturizer for hair that lets you change the texture of your hair to beautiful.
Texture. The one thing that's basic to beautiful hair. Well, now you can actually change the texture of your hair with Breck Basic, the first texturizer for hair. After your shampoo, comb Breck Basic through. Suddenly your hair has new body, new fullness. Suddenly your hair has texture, and beautiful texture is basic. Breck Basic, the first texturizer for hair.
At the same hearing today, Secretary Laird said the Russians are building rockets able to hit the United States so hard it would not be able to strike back. Whereupon Senator Fulbright said Laird was only trying to frighten the American people so as to get money out of Congress. Laird was defending the anti-ballistic missile system, saying it was needed to protect this country's ability to strike back. Fulbright said this happened all the time. Scary stories about the Russians' power used by the Pentagon in what he called a technique of salesmanship, selling whatever weapon the Pentagon wanted at the moment. Here's how it went.
I believe the United States today, and I don't want anyone in this room, in this country, or in this world to question the deterrent force which the United States of America possesses today.
Well, I think that's
and there is absolutely no question in my mind that we have the power, we have the capability in order as of today. But as Secretary of Defense, I must be concerned about the time period of the 1975s and in that particular time period because of the developments that are taking place within the Soviet Union and because of the increase in the budget for military weapons in the Soviet Union.
This assumption that more weapons necessarily and obviously and unquestionably increases our security is not true. And I think this is the very basis of it. And I don't think you're a bit more interested in our security than I am or the members of this committee. The only question is whether or not this is wise and whether it enhances that security. And there are a few other observations. In your statement on page 6, there's a great deal made about declassifying information. Well, we had experience about this before, and I only wish to observe that the mere fact that information has been classified does not make it necessarily true.
Ministers will refrain.
We had this same question in hearings on the Tonkin Gulf. Now, one other estimate. It seems to me...
May I respond to that?
Yes, indeed.
I hope that the intelligence estimates that go out to the 1975 time period are not true, Senator Fulbright. I would hope and pray that they would not be true, but I cannot assume that on the basis of the joint intelligence community estimates, that those estimates are untrue today, because as you know, they are projections as to the capabilities and to the probable position of the Soviet Union.
A further observation on page 8, this happens all the time. In discussing their military, the Russians' military capacity, they suddenly become men 10 feet tall. They can do all sorts of things. Their skill and talent is almost unbelievable. They can do all these things. And yet, when we discuss them as a society, they are inadequate in practically every respect.
Our point is, we're building this system so that we will not have a nuclear war. If there is a first strike on this country, according to the information that I have seen, and if it's a massive strike, 80, 90, 100 million Americans are going to die. And the country is going to be incendiarized to the point that there will be precious little left. As Khrushchev himself once admitted, the survivors would envy the dead. We're trying to avoid that.
All right. We're agreed on that.
All right, we're agreed on that. And the question is, how do we best avoid it? Do we strengthen the credibility of our deterrent by suddenly beginning to build a defensive system? I think we do not. I think that might even raise questions in the Russian mind, as if we're trying to prepare a capacity to absorb this attack. I don't see how you add. I don't see how you add to the deterrent, Mr. Secretary, by raising any doubts in the Russian mind. And I know you don't intend to, but the very construction of a system might raise some doubts.
If we're going to prevent nuclear war, it's important that the nation attacking us realizes beyond a question of a doubt that we will have enough surviving force in this important time period that we're talking about in the presentation that we will make in a few moments. That we have this surviving force so that we can deliver that devastating attack. This will stop the nuclear delivery. This will protect our people. This will keep the peace.
251 members of the National Academy of Scientists sent a letter to President Nixon opposing the ABM. They said the U.S. was already developing a weapon capable of breaking through anyone else's ABM defense, and said the Russians could build one as well as we could. So they concluded this would only be another disastrous spiral in the arms race. And they signed the letter, they said, not only as scientists, but as citizens, deeply troubled.
Whatever your day is like, stop at a Holiday Inn where you're number one. Holiday Inn means number one service at a sensible price. Number one service like free ice, free TV, a swimming pool, and a number one restaurant in every Holiday Inn. Even the children are number one. So whatever your day is like, relax at a Holiday Inn where you're number one.
After every close election, there is talk of reforming the Electoral College, since almost everyone agrees it is awkward, outmoded, and dangerous. But there is always disagreement on what to do, and so far nobody's done anything but talk. We're in that stage now, and it is uncertain we'll get beyond it. President Nixon recommended that the electoral votes be kept, but divided proportionately. That is, if a candidate gets 60% of a state's popular votes, he'd get 60% of its electoral votes. But the polls show a vast majority of the American public would eliminate electoral votes entirely and let the popular votes decide it. In a committee hearing on this today, Senators Muskie of Maine and Thurmond of South Carolina argued these two sides.
Now, in the close election under the system proposed by the senator, the election can go to the second man in the popular vote. Under the present system, the election can go to the second man into the popular vote. Under the direct popular vote of the president, the election goes to the man who gets the most votes. And it's the close election we have to be concerned about.
Under the system recommended by President Nixon, which is a proportional system, each state would retain, as it does now, 2 votes in the Electoral College. Therefore, you recognize the little states like yours and other little states. Then, the other electoral votes, of course, would come from the congressional districts, that is, one from each congressional district. In that way, you recognize the federal system, rather than just recognizing a straight popular vote throughout the nation.
You couldn't sell that argument, Senator, to 1 out of 100 voters on the streets of my state. And mine is a small state. Because what you're talking about is a method of taking the selection of the president out of their hands as voters. They don't buy it.
James Earl Ray has hired another lawyer, J.B. Stoner by name, who has had some connections with the Ku Klux Klan in the past. Stoner will represent Ray in trying to get a new trial for the murder of Dr. Martin Luther King. There was more Arab-Israeli shooting across the Jordan River, and an Israeli airplane was shot down. The United States, in trying to maintain some kind of relationships with both sides in the Middle East, often finds its situation somewhat awkward, as in this report by NBC News correspondent Roy Neal.
Pilots and ground crews from foreign nations go to Lackland Air Force Base in preparation for training in the planes their countries buy from the United States. In the language laboratory at Lackland, they learn to speak English.
Do you remember his rank?
Do you remember his rank?
Is this the right road?
In this class are the uniforms of Saudi Arabia and Jordan, Libya and Iran, Morocco and Tunisia. The Arab nations have almost 300 officers and enlisted men in training at Lackland.
The light L always comes before a vowel.
Also at the school are more than 120 Israelis, identifiable by their dark blue uniforms, completing a 7-week course in basic English and advanced language needed for learning how to fly and service American jet planes and helicopters. The Arabs and Israelis dine together in the same mess hall, but they don't talk to one another. The American officers who run the Defense Department language school say there have been no fights, no incidents. For the students, this must be neutral territory, even when they meet on the sidewalk. There are separate barracks. The Arab students study about 100 feet away from the dormitory where the students from Israel are housed. Weapons are not permitted on the base as a precautionary measure. Weapons training will come later on. The Arabs and Israelis receive their language training in separate classrooms, but they often find themselves boarding tour buses to learn about the surrounding community together. Their contact ends here. From Lackland, they go to separate flight schools to learn to fly U.S. jets, helicopters, and other planes. Then they go home, prepared to fly in battle against each other. Roy Neal, NBC News reporting.
Come to the Florida Sunshine Tree for fresh taste and orange juice naturally. Orange juice with natural vitamin C from the Florida Sunshine Tree.
Hi, I'm Anita Bryant. And though I have a busy schedule, my family and good nutrition come first. So our breakfast begins with orange juice from Florida, with that good, natural sunshine taste. And it's just packed with energy. You know, you can buy it many ways. Fresh frozen concentrate. This little can makes a big pitcher full. Or ready-to-serve bottles or cartons, and easy-to-store cans.
From the Florida Sunshine Tree.
Breakfast without orange juice is like a day without sunshine.
The Huntley Brinkley Report continues, brought to you by Polydent Powder. People believe in Polydent for cleaner-looking dentures and fresher-tasting breath. Polydent Powder.
We own this Italian restaurant. I wear dentures, but I have to meet so many people, I can't afford denture odor. I've tried almost everything, but nothing works for me like Polydent.
People keep coming back to Polydent because no tablet, powder, or paste gives them the cleaning satisfaction of Polydent. No wonder dentists surveyed recommend Polydent over all other leading brands combined. No wonder denture wearers keep coming back to Polydent.
The White House says President Nixon will have something to say, probably this weekend, on the subject that now seems to irritate the American people most, the turmoil and disorder on the college campuses. He may threaten criminal prosecution of anyone crossing state lines to cause campus riots. Congress passed a law against that last year. At one of the most disturbed of all the campuses, San Francisco State College, peace may now break out. Here's a report from NBC News correspondent Jack Perkins.
After 4 months, 600 arrests, countless cracked heads, and choruses of pigs off campus, the strike at San Francisco State is finally, formally over. In a way, it's been over several weeks. When the new semester began last month, students began returning to classes, losing interest in picketing and striking. So, with waning support, strike leaders, who had insisted that their demands were not negotiable, began negotiating. This week, agreement was reached. Under the agreement, a school of black studies will be established at San Francisco State. The college had agreed to that months ago. Additional Negroes will be admitted. But several student demands, including demands for amnesty and autonomy, they lost. There was weary resignation in the scrawled sign that greeted students today. Dr. Hayakawa, as acting president of the college, had sworn he would never give in to all the student demands, but that order would be restored. Well, he didn't, and it was. And today, his hard line seemed to have been vindicated.
Dr. Hayakawa, in the layman's language, did you win?
I don't know.
Dr. Reagan figured you did.
Well, good. I've told you before, I do not regard things as victories or defeats. That's not the problem. Can we find a workable solution so that we can live together in peace and go on with our studies? And I think maybe that we have a solution, and if not, we've got to start working all over again.
Like Dr. Hayakawa, I don't want to get into questions of victory and defeat. I think that the thunder was definitely heard from San Francisco State. The impact, I feel, of the strike is beginning to show predominantly at this point at other colleges. That is, black studies is now a reality across higher education.
Police are still on campus at San Francisco State, and Dr. Hayakawa says he will keep them there until he's sure the deal won't come unstuck. Throughout all the months in which students, not all of them, but some of them, were marching, picketing, throwing bricks through windows and bottles at police, during all that time, students said they would never compromise their 15 demands. Well, they have compromised them. Sign on the wall says the strike is dead. Reason has prevailed. So now the sign writers can get back to education and maybe even learn how to spell prevailed. Jack Perkins, NBC News, San Francisco State College.
The new Secretary of the Interior, Walter Hickel, was gummed up in an oil slick almost as soon as he took office, almost before he even knew where his desk was. Now, today, he has announced there'll be no more oil drilling off Santa Barbara, California, where the big mess occurred, for an indefinite time. Here's what he said.
We have a map behind us that shows just exactly what we did in setting aside a preserve in front of the oil sanctuary in Santa Barbara that the state set aside, and other areas of a buffer zone of federal lands that are not now under lease. It also state that all production and drilling will be suspended and stay in suspension until we are sure that we can do it in a safe manner that will not harm the natural environment or the beauty of the beaches or marine life. And when we do put our new regulations into effect, we think it will be as safe as is humanly possible to make them. I think that the whole federal government has learned that we must take a look at what is the potential in the Outer Continental Shelf and what is the liability of what might happen, such as what happened in Santa Barbara. And so we should have a value placed on things other than just the energy we're trying to get out from underneath the ocean.
If you like yummy things like peach parfait, come on, live a little. Have a cup of Yuban for dessert. Yuban, the gorgeous coffee. So exciting it's like dessert, even for breakfast. Yuban costs a little more, but boy, it's scrumptious coffee. Yuban tastes fattening, that's how rich it is. Go on, live a little. Have a cup of Yuban for dessert.
Oh, no, Mrs. Bird.
Don't worry about it, Dennis.
I thought you were Dale.
Dale's my teenage daughter. We're often confused. How do I stay so slim? Exercise and Post Grape Nuts for breakfast. Fills you up, not out.
Like the Burks, your whole family will enjoy the chewy, nut-like flavor of Grape Nuts. Delicious Post Grape Nuts. Helps you stay in good shape. It fills you up, not out.
There are reports in Washington that General Eisenhower's doctors now are more concerned than ever about his condition. It was learned that last Saturday he suffered what they called a temporary congestive heart failure. A man named William J. McCabe was serving time in the Washington, D.C. jail for forgery. He'd been convicted twice. Today, the jail got an order signed by a judge ordering him released, and they did. Only then did they find the order was forged. The British Army moved equipment and supplies into Anguilla and talked about building roads and putting in electricity and said their troops would leave soon. The Anguillans demanded that the British leave now. Prices on the New York Stock Exchange went down a little today. The Dow Jones Industrials lost a fraction of a point in a day of routine trading. An average share of common stock lost 9 cents. On his way to California today, President Nixon stopped off in Independence, Missouri to call on Harry Truman and to give him the piano he used to play when he was in the White House. For two men who once hated each other, or sounded as if they did, it was all very warm and cordial. A report from NBC News correspondent Herbert Kaplow at WDAF-TV in Kansas City.
After about half an hour at the Truman home in Independence, the two men set out for the Truman Library about a mile away. The 56-year-old Nixon was very respectful of his 84-year-old predecessor He'd often spoken kindly of Mr. Truman in recent years, but it took a long time for Mr. Truman to forget some of the less kind words Mr. Nixon had said about Democrats in earlier years. Mr. Nixon wanted today to again dramatize national unity, and that was okay with Mr. Truman. At the library, there was a good-sized crowd, to which the president responded appropriately. He also told newsmen how his meeting with Mr. Truman had gone.
And he's right up on everything.
Anything specifically he told you?
Thank you, gentlemen. Well, I wouldn't discuss, of course, what we specifically discussed. I never do, you know, and probably like it's very helpful, and I'm arranging that President Truman, like President Johnson and President Eisenhower, will have regular briefings on world affairs, and he welcomed that. He said he would like to have it, and we're arranging that.
Mr. Nixon donated a piano to the library that Mr. Truman had used in the White House. The former president had once played piano with actress Lauren Bacall sprawled on it. There was no Lauren Bacall today, but the present president performed anyway. Of course, the Missouri Waltz.
And it seemed to me that since, in addition to many other great contributions to the nation President Truman has made, that he is certainly the most distinguished and accomplished pianist, that his piano from the White House ought to be in his library. And here it is, Mr. President. Appreciate it.
Play some.
Well, I'll play something for the President. I play everything in the key of G, Mr. President. It's my ear. Let me try it out first.
Good night for NBC News.
Stop stalling. Here's an outlet for your lawn care frustrations. Thanks to this cord, Black & Decker's new 18 and 22-inch electric lawnmowers start the first time, every time. The completely safe double-insulated motor vacuums grass up to be cut down to size. And because it's so much lighter, you get up and down hills with ease. It gets closer to things. And this safety-locking flip-over handle helps you keep the cord out of the way all the time. Stop stalling. Black & Decker electric lawnmowers start as low as $69.99. Men who work with power tools know. For value, performance, and service, you can expect the best from Black & Decker.
See some of Hollywood's greatest moments and greatest stars on camera and off in Hollywood, The Selznick Years, with Ingrid Bergman, Rock Hudson, Gregory Peck, Joseph Cotton, and Katharine Hepburn. Tonight at 10, 9 Central Time on NBC.
This is